Have you ever seen the news where a government spends billions on something ridiculous? And you thought, wait, how are they paying for this if they're already in debt? Here's the crazy part. It's not just your country. Almost every nation on Earth is in debt, even the richest ones. India, Germany, Switzerland, Qatar, Japan, they all owe trillions. Japan's debt is actually twice the size of its entire economy, and the United States, over $36 trillion, and still rising. Sounds insane, right? But there's a reason behind this madness. So why do countries keep borrowing? Why don't they just print their own money? And if everyone owes money, who are they borrowing from? Today, we're going to break down these questions, clearly and simply. But first, let's start from the very beginning. What is national debt? A country's total debt is called national debt or sovereign debt. It's the sum of all the money the government owes. Just like people take out loans to buy houses or cars, governments borrow when they spend more than they earn. The difference is, governments don't borrow from one bank. They borrow from other countries, big financial institutions, and even their own citizens. Why do governments borrow? You might think, if they can print money, why not just print what they need and pay it off? Because printing too much money destroys the economy. That's exactly what happened in Venezuela and Zimbabwe. Their currencies became so worthless they were cheaper than newspaper. Borrowing, on the other hand, brings discipline. Debt comes with interest, and that forces the government to be careful with spending. So why does a country borrow? There are 5 main reasons. 1. Budget deficit. When a government's spending exceeds its income, a gap appears. If you collect $3 trillion in taxes but spend $4 trillion, that extra $1 trillion has to come from borrowing. Raise taxes, people get angry. Cut spending, services collapse. So debt becomes the lesser evil. 2. Investment for growth. Debt isn't always bad. In fact, it can fuel growth. Countries borrow to build roads, schools, hospitals, boosting productivity and living standards. A stronger economy means more taxes, and that debt eventually pays for itself. 3. Crises and disasters. During pandemics, wars, or earthquakes, governments need to act fast. In 2020, the U.S. borrowed $3.8 trillion just for COVID relief. Without it, millions would have lost their jobs. 4. Paying old debt. Yes, governments also borrow to repay old loans, like refinancing a mortgage. It's fine when done carefully. But if it gets out of control, it can lead to total collapse, like Sri Lanka. 5. As a tool of monetary policy. Sometimes the government borrows to control inflation or stimulate growth. By selling bonds, it pulls money out of the market, cooling down inflation. Or it can borrow and spend, pumping money in to boost the economy. What's a bond? A bond is basically the government saying, lend me money and I'll pay you back with interest. It's how the state borrows from citizens and investors. So who lends all this money? There are 3 main sources. 1. Domestic borrowing. Citizens, banks, and funds buy government bonds. When you buy one, you're literally lending to your country. 2. Foreign borrowing. Other nations or big global investors can also buy bonds. For example, Japan and China are America's largest creditors. But weak countries can't attract such investors, so the IMF or World Bank steps in. They do lend money, but with conditions. Raise taxes, cut spending, privatize services. And those conditions often spark massive protests. 3. Central bank. A government can also borrow from its own central bank, but that's basically the same as printing money, and it's dangerous because it leads to inflation. Is government debt always bad? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Used wisely, debt drives growth, but if it's uncontrolled, interest payments eat up the budget, and health, education, and other vital services suffer. When debt gets too high, investor confidence falls. Credit ratings drop, interest rates rise, and eventually, you get a debt crisis. It's not about whether a country has debt, it's about how it manages it. So why do some nations survive massive debt, while others collapse under it? That is a story for another video.